In this video, I will briefly talk about some of the common elements in fiction to help you prepare to write essay number 2, which is a literary analysis essay. When we talk about literature and we think about stories, and that can be kind of anything that falls into that realm, short stories, novels, poems, songs, each part has a specific meaning, and all of these separate parts tie together to form a unified whole or theme. And in essay number 2, you're looking for that unified whole or the theme, and you're going to write about that theme. To help us get started, we always want to consider the title of the literature that we're reading. So a title has considerable power to attract our attention, and it can help us better understand what a story is about. Titles can be names of central characters, they can suggest mystery, they can promise a certain kind of setting or atmosphere, they can be symbolic or metaphorical, they can be whimsical or funny, and they can be ironic. Looking at the examples of the mo'olelo that I included for essay number 2, the Hala'i Hills, this refers to a vahipana, or a storied place, so place is important in this story. Maui and the sun. Maui, in this case, we're looking at the person, not the place, because we have the kahako here over the a or the a in this word. So we're looking at characters. And then the waters of Kane, also referring to place and to specific sources of water within a place. So the titles, again, will give us some insight into what are really the key areas of interest or importance in the story. When we talk about setting in a story, in general, we're talking about location, so where the story is taking place. But some other considerations that apply to setting include how a setting can express or mirror a central character's behaviors or emotional state of mind, how a setting can shift or change to reflect changes in a character's mood or in the plot of a story, and then how setting can also shift in time and can move from past to present and to future and so forth. So some other considerations about setting. When we refer to plot in fiction, we are talking about the sequence of events or incidents that tell the story, and all plots must have at least one conflict. There are different types of conflict. Of course, as you know, as a person, right, in our lives, we have all kinds of conflict. In literature, some of the common types of conflicts that we read about are person against person, person against the environment. So someone could be up against an external force, could be nature, it could be the weather, it could be society, or this antiquated kind of idea of fate. And then person against themselves. So maybe the real conflict is within a character. This could be physical, mental, emotional, or moral. And then we sometimes want to consider the significance associated with a character's name. Sometimes a name can provide information about a character's personality. They can be symbolic, and they can give us, again, just some insight into about what type of character the person is. So if we take this example of Hina Keahi from the one of the mo'olelo that you'll be reading, think about what her name means and then how that might apply to her role within the story and even the theme of the story. Sometimes a character's physical description can also reveal important information about the character. So just kind of to keep that in mind. And then for each story, you want to always identify protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist is the central character. This means the character who receives the most attention within the story, the character that's written the most about in the story. And they can be sympathetic or unsympathetic, so they don't necessarily have to be the hero of the story. And then the forces working against the protagonist are the antagonists. There can be more than one antagonist. The antagonist can be a person, but doesn't have to be. We could have something like nature or society that operate as an antagonist. So again, whatever is causing the conflict or the problem for the protagonist is the antagonist. The different elements in fiction that we've talked about so far all help us to identify theme, and theme is really the most important consideration in a story. When we talk about theme in literature, we're talking about, if you want to think of it in kind of like reading terms, the controlling idea or the central insight. So the theme can be a revelation of human character, doesn't have to be, and it may be stated briefly or at great length. There's really no kind of guideline for that. A theme has to be expressible in the form of a statement, so you wouldn't want to see something like war, but you need to add a statement about the topic to make it a theme. As an example, war is pointless and a curse on humanity. This tells us something about the topic war. What opinion can we gain or can we find in the reading about the topic? Also, a theme needs to be stated as a generalization. So we want to leave out specific information like characters, names, or situations, but more of a generalization about life that we can take from what the characters are showing us in the story to make this generalization through their actions and their words and whatnot. And then the theme cannot be a generalization larger than is justified by the terms of the story. So, in other words, the theme has to account for all of the major details in the story. It can't be contradicted by any detail in the story, and it can't rely on supposed facts. We have to be able to take information from the story to support the theme, which is what you're doing when you write your literary analysis essay. If you make a claim that the theme is a certain point, then you need to be able to pull parts of the story out to support that point or theme. And there's not one magical way of stating a theme. They can be expressed differently based on your interpretation of a story. And we want to avoid any statement that reduces a theme to a familiar saying like an aphorism or a cliche. Some examples include "a stitch in time saves 9," "you can't judge a book by its cover." These are so overused that they kind of lose their meaning. So you want to dig deeper and be more specific to the story itself in deciding what the theme is. I'm just going to really quickly mention point of view. We're not going to get into all the different types of point of views, but in a story, the way an author tells a story is referred to as the point of view. And then just to know that there are different points of views that authors use to tell stories. In the last section of this video, I'm going to talk about some of the more common figures of speech that we see in fiction, and just to keep in mind that there are over 200 types of figures of speech in the English language, so I'm just hitting on, again, some of the more commonly used figures of speech. So let's take a look at symbol. A symbol is a literary, or in literature, a literary symbol means more than what it is. So it's something that has layers of meaning. If we were talking about an image, for example, that just refers to one meaning, but a symbol has many meanings. We can look for names, as I mentioned previously, as symbols. Objects can be symbolic, and actions can be symbolic or symbols within stories. We need to keep in mind that the story itself has to furnish a clue that a detail is to be taken symbolically or is used as a symbol. And symbols nearly always signal their existence by emphasis, repetition, or position within a story. The meaning of a literary symbol must be established and supported by the entire context of the story. So we don't want to pull things out of context and say, for example, oh, this is a red rose, it means love. That has to be supported in the story, so that maybe necessarily isn't what the red rose in the story means. It could be something entirely different. So looking at how something is used in context within the story is really important to determine whether or not it's symbolic within the story. So to be considered a symbol, the item, the name, the action has to suggest a meaning different in kind from its literal meaning. And then again, to think about a symbol as something that has a cluster of meanings and not just one meaning. A metaphor is a term that refers to when an author attempts to represent one thing more effectively by comparing it to another. So the comparison involves two very different things. So we have a comparison of two very different things, and we try to show how they're similar or alike. That's a metaphor. A metaphor can be extended throughout an entire story, and that's called an extended metaphor, or it could just be short and it's just maybe a one-time reference within a story. And then irony is probably a term you're familiar with. In literature, irony, there are several different types of irony. We're only going to talk about 3. But it's a term with a range of meanings, and all of these meanings involve some kind of discrepancy or incongruity. So we don't want to confuse irony with sarcasm. Sarcasm is a type of language that's meant to be mean. When we look at irony in literature, and again, I'm going to just talk about the 3 common types. There are more than 3 types of irony in literature. We are going to look at verbal irony, so saying the opposite of what is actually meant. Sarcasm does this, but with the intention specifically to be mean or hurtful. Dramatic irony is the contrast between what a character says and what the reader knows to be true. And then situational irony is the discrepancy between appearance and reality, or between expectation and fulfillment, or what would seem appropriate, but we kind of are seeing the opposite occur. I know I went over those really quickly, so I don't expect you to be experts at pulling out figurative language and literature, but just some considerations to think about as you read the Mo'olelo for essay number 2. And then overall, to conclude this presentation and to help you prepare for essay number 2 in terms of finding the theme in a story, you should ask, what are the conflicts? Are they physical? Are they intellectual, moral, or emotional? Is the main conflict between sharply differentiated good and evil, or is it more subtle and complex? And then in what ways do the conflicts help us understand the theme or the main point of the story? Who is the protagonist, and who or what is the antagonist or antagonists if you identify more than one? And how does the protagonist and antagonist help us to understand the story's theme? Is the theme implicit or explicit? So are we told directly this is the point being made, or do we have to look at everything that's kind of being suggested or hinted at through characters' conversations or actions to come up with a theme? Does the theme reinforce or oppose popular notions of life? Does it furnish a new insight or refresh or deepen an old one? And then tying this back to yourself, how does the theme relate to your academic journey or huaka'i? And then, does the story make use of symbols? If so, what kind of symbols? Are names, objects, actions symbolic within the story? And if so, do they carry or merely reinforce the meaning of the story or the theme of the story? And then, if they are present, how do they help us understand the story's theme? And then lastly, does the story anywhere utilize situational irony, dramatic irony, or verbal irony? And if so, what functions do the ironies serve, and how do they help us relate to the story's theme? And this concludes this presentation. Thank you.